Hansel and Gretel. Once upon a time, in a little cottage by the edge of a big, dark forest, lived a brother and sister named Hansel and Gretel. Hansel was the older brother, brave and clever, and Gretel was his kind and gentle little sister. They lived with their father, who was a poor woodcutter, and their stepmother, who was often unkind to them. The family was very poor, and sometimes they didn't have enough food to eat. One night, Hansel and Gretel overheard their stepmother talking to their father. She whispered, "We don't have enough food for all of us. We must take Hansel and Gretel into the forest and leave them there. That way, we will have more to eat." The father didn't want to leave his children, but the stepmother insisted. Hansel and Gretel were very scared when they heard this, but Hansel had an idea. As the family went to bed, Hansel quietly slipped outside and gathered a few white pebbles from the ground. He put them in his pocket and then crept back into bed, ready for the next day. Early the next morning, the stepmother woke them up. "Come, children," she said. "We are going into the forest to gather wood." She handed them each a small piece of bread for their breakfast, but that was all. As they walked into the forest, Hansel secretly dropped the little white pebbles on the ground, one by one. He knew that the pebbles would help them find their way back home. When they were deep in the woods, the stepmother said, "Wait here, children. Your father and I will come back for you." But Hansel and Gretel waited and waited, and soon they realized their parents were not coming back. Gretel began to cry, but Hansel comforted her. "Don't worry, Gretel," he said. "I left a trail of white pebbles. We can follow it home." As the moon rose, they saw the pebbles shining like tiny stars. Hansel and Gretel followed the trail, and soon they found their way back to their cottage. Their father was happy to see them, but their stepmother was not. She scolded them and was very upset that they had returned. A few days later, the stepmother decided to take Hansel and Gretel even deeper into the forest. This time, Hansel tried to gather more pebbles, but the stepmother had locked the door, so he couldn't go outside. The next morning, as they left for the forest, Hansel tried a new idea. He crumbled his small piece of bread and secretly dropped tiny crumbs along the path, hoping to make a new trail to follow. Once they were far into the forest, the stepmother and father left Hansel and Gretel again. Hansel comforted Gretel, saying, "Don't worry, Gretel. I left a trail of breadcrumbs. We can follow it home." But when they tried to find the trail, they were in for a surprise. The breadcrumbs were gone. Birds from the forest had eaten every last crumb. Hansel and Gretel were lost, with no way to find their way home. The two children wandered through the forest, feeling tired and hungry. After walking for a long time, they came upon a wonderful sight. A little house made entirely of gingerbread, candy, and cakes. The walls were made of chocolate, the windows were made of sugar, and the roof was covered in colorful gumdrops. Hansel's eyes grew wide. "Look, Gretel, it's a house made of candy." The children were so hungry that they started nibbling on the walls and licking the sweet sugar windows. Just then, the door opened, and an old woman stepped out. She smiled at them kindly and said, "Well, well, my little dears. Are you hungry? Come inside, and I will give you something even better to eat." Hansel and Gretel were excited and followed the woman into the house. Inside, the house was warm and cozy, with the smell of fresh cookies and cakes. The old woman gave Hansel and Gretel a delicious meal, and she even gave them warm beds to sleep in. Hansel and Gretel were so happy. They thought they had found a safe place. But what they didn't know was that the old woman was actually a wicked witch. She had built the candy house to lure children into her home. The next morning, the witch's true plan was revealed. She locked Hansel in a cage and told Gretel, "You will help me make food for your brother. When he is fat enough, I will eat him." Gretel was very scared, but she had to do as the witch said. Every day, the witch would check on Hansel and say, "Stick out your finger so I can see if you are fat enough to eat." But Hansel was clever. He knew the witch couldn't see very well, so he would stick out a little bone instead. The witch would feel the bone and say, "He is still too skinny." This went on for many days. Hansel stayed in the cage, and Gretel worked hard, hoping they would find a way to escape. One day, the witch grew impatient. "I don't care if he's fat or not," she said. "Tomorrow, I will eat him." Gretel was terrified, but she came up with a plan. The next morning, the witch ordered Gretel to check the oven to see if it was hot enough. "Crawl in and check it," she demanded. But Gretel was clever, too. She pretended not to understand. "How do I check it?" she asked. "Could you show me?" The witch huffed and said, "Oh, fine. I will show you myself." She bent down and stuck her head into the oven. Quickly, Gretel gave her a big push, and the witch fell right in. Gretel shut the oven door tight, trapping the witch inside. With the witch gone, Gretel hurried to free Hansel from the cage. They hugged each other, happy and relieved. Together, they explored the witch's house and found a big chest filled with gold and jewels. Hansel and Gretel filled their pockets with as much treasure as they could carry. Finally, Hansel and Gretel found their way out of the forest. They walked until they found the path that led back home. When they arrived at the cottage, their father was overjoyed to see them. He had missed them so much and was very sorry for what had happened. Hansel and Gretel showed their father the treasure they had brought back. With the gold and jewels, they would never be poor or hungry again. Their stepmother was gone, and now they could live happily together. From that day on, Hansel, Gretel, and their father lived in peace. They had enough food to eat and a cozy home, and they were never scared again.